Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Geeks from the Multiverse. We're going to be talking about some video game role playing games in this episode. It's going to be a great episode, and we're going to try to define what exactly is an RPG. So stay tuned. What's up, everybody? I am Matt, your host, Geeks from the Multiverse podcast. With me, as always, is John.
What's up, y'all? And I know,
And we got Hank here. Don't
oh,
forget
oh,
Hank.
yes.
We always forget Hank.
we always forget. I'm sorry, buddy. I know what the problem is your mouth keeps opening up, and I'm wondering if those flies are starting to buzz through because, man, I understand spring's around the corner, and I'm just watching out for your health, man. Like, you just need to close your mouth from time to time. That's all I'm going to say. But yes, today's episode, guys, with role playing games and whatnot. So, like, we look at role playing games very differently in today's standards versus what it actually was when video games really started to come about, right, Matt? Because like, you look at, I mean, we're going to talk about it, of course, but like D&D, right? So like D&D was your very first kind of role playing game in a
Right.
sense.
Dungeons and Dragons, for those of you who are like, D&D, what's that? Dungeons and Dragons, of course, that's not the only one. I mean, there was Pathfinder and there's other ones too, but your Dungeons and Dragons, which is your tabletop role-playing games, which used, dice and books, and you had your character sheets, and it was not video game based until, about the 70s. If you were able to play that in the 70s, I guess.
I guess if you were alive during that time, Matt, I mean, just going to say it now, but
But yeah, I mean the role playing game is not new, but as far as video games are I guess very early on before there were consoles, it would have been the CRPG, which is the computer role playing game.
oh, I thought you were about to be like, imagination. Like, you had to use your brain to create basically a game in a sense.
Well, I mean that's kind of what Dungeons and Dragons is. I mean, you have to create basically a character on paper, and then you have to physically act out and talk as that character in a tabletop game. Physically, like it's not like playing a video game where you can see your character and interact with it with a controller or whatever. It's much different, tabletop wise. But before there were consoles and things like PlayStations and Xboxes and Nintendos and Genesis and all these other
And Game
consoles,
Boys, yeah.
everything was computers, and it wasn't, a lot of the earlier on role playing games were text based. They weren't even graphics, they were just words on a screen.
And that, my friends, would be what we call very boring. Or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Very fucking boring because if you're looking at today's, I'm going to say this, guys, you're this younger generation. If you think what today's standards is like, if you're like, oh, this is boring, I guarantee you, if you grew up around this time, or if you were just looking at text on a screen and that was the game, pretty sure your imagination would be like, all right, man, is this really all life is about? Just a bunch of words on a computer and that's it? Because I told you, Matt, like this new wave of technology that we have. I mean, VR and even just the simple graphics on like a computer or a console or all these things. I mean, it's crazy with the amount of especially like a lot of the what we call role playing games now. Really, it's more the subgenres of role playing games of how they have really updated over the years because like your traditional um RPG is not really what an RPG is, let's say in today's standard, because again, the subgenres kind of take over that realm of really what an RPG is now.
Yeah, and it's, the idea of today's games being an RPG or whether it's not an RPG, it's really been watered down, I guess you could say, because what defines an RPG, like a lot of games now have elements of an RPG, but are technically not counted as an RPG.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna also throw it like this, but like, look at music, right? So there's, without certain types of music, there wouldn't be, let's say, for example, like hip hop or rap, or let's say rock and roll, or let's say, you know, rock basically established the foundation for like you got metal and you got hardcore rock, and there's all these like different stuff. So it's kind of like looking at it like that, where you have this main core of let's say music, or in this case, an actual genre of gaming. And now they're like, okay, well, now let's see if we can create new genres within the same realm, but like, how do you define what that is? Like, is it a tactical RPG, or is it an action RPG,
Right.
or an adventure RPG? Like, what is the definition, and how do we describe that? Because I know you and I talked about it a little bit, where we might have, let's say certain, characteristics, certain things that might make it up as an RPG, but like, if you looked at like what an RPG really is, it's like I don't really think there's an actual really good term to really define it, because like again, with these other genres of RPGs, like they kind of do their own thing.
Right. I mean, there are characteristics of
Well,
what an
yes.
RPG is, and from the research that we've done, all RPGs would share five basic elements to be classified, I guess, as an RPG.
Which I would say in most games, I would say majority of games now, in today's sense, in some characteristic form, they do follow these. I wouldn't say to a T, but they do basically follow these guidelines, because I feel like a lot of the games we've played, even some of the shooting games and things like that, they do literally like a lot of like let's say Wildlands or something like that, where you and I played. You're building a character, you're upgrading said character, you're doing things to make your character better, because
Right.
the ultimate goal is, of course, once you beat said game, that you're like, oh, I'm level 50 whatever, and you're like, yeah, I'm like, I have all my stuff and blah blah blah. But it you basically get to a point where there's also certain games where you look at Skyrim or something like that, where you might spend years playing, and there's always new content, and there's all these side quests, and there's all these like different things that come up to date. Like, that's a game, of course. Of course, there should be a lot more games like that, where you want to play for years, and you're like, man, I still haven't beaten everything. And if you did, you're like, oh, now I want to replay the whole thing, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to take another 12 years of my life, playing
Right.
the same thing all over
Yeah.
again.
And one of the things that, I saw in the research was, and this is where the action role playing games really come into play, that the typical, video game RPG, the classic definition and characteristic is that they will rarely challenge a player's like physical coordination or reaction time.
Yeah, okay. So I can see what you mean by that, because like, if you're looking at, I know we're talking like D&D here, because like I'm just kind of throwing that as an example. I mean, yeah, you're not talking about like, okay, I'm going to react to if this guy's going to shoot me in 2 seconds, or something like that, like really quick, fast reaction time.
I
Or
honestly think of, I mean, this is, and most of these like souls like, I call them souls like
okay,
because there's, Bloodborne and there's Dark
oh yeah,
Souls
yeah,
and
yeah,
Dark Souls
yep.
2, Elden Ring is one of them. When I think of Elden Ring, your level of physical coordination and reaction time literally needs to be at top peak physic, like it needs to be the best, because if you don't react in like that fraction of a second, you're basically playing the dead game, because that game will kill you about 100 times and it will frustrate the shit out of you.
And that's where you rage quit and you start throwing shit, and then you're
Yeah,
like, well, I have a broken TV that I can't play the game
because
on.
you have like, your third boss that you face in the game who kills you about 1,000 times.
which apparently is actually the hardest. But no, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
because you just can't beat him because you can't, you know, dive out of his attack fast enough, or, and that's, when you're looking at that classic kind of RPG, it's not the physical, coordination or the reaction time that defines that style of game. It's really, you're controlling that player, you're exploring the world, engaging in combat, growing in your abilities, and it's not necessarily challenging your coordination or reaction time, in that, like, if you don't react in that fraction of a second, that blow is going to kill you because I didn't roll out quick enough. And I think of games maybe um like the classic Final Fantasies, where those are more tactical and they're turn based.
Right. Yeah.
It's not necessarily about the coordination or reaction time. It's about strategy.
Well, and so that's what I was going to say is like strategy and really building your character. So, like, if you're versing, let's say you're a level 50 and, like, this boss is a level 60, and you're like, okay, well, how am I going to beat this guy and he's 10 levels above me? And how am I going to do that within a certain amount of time? Because let's say the next boss you have is 5 levels more on top of him, so forth, right? And you need to think, okay, well, do I have enough, let's say, potions, or do I have enough, like, health,
Right.
like, whatever,
Can I
stimulus?
go on side quests,
Right.
whatever. But
But no, I agree. But, like,
yeah,
it seems like, when we look at RPGs nowadays, it's all about the reaction time. It's all about the how quick can I get there as soon as possible? Because, like, and this is where I understand that I'm going to say what I'm about to say is not technically an RPG, but, like, yes, I know Matt and his Call of Duty, like the reaction times, and sometimes in those kinds of games where you have to react in a very quick motion, and it's fractions of a second, and you don't have very long to, like, aim and shoot, and that's call it a day. That's where I feel like, yeah, and like certain games, like if it's, let's say, solo play, and a lot of the games that, we've played even, separately, you do need to have that kind of, like, that years of training from, your hands, and you're like, okay, let's do this,
right.
and you need to do all that. But, like, that's why I mean, like, the olden days, of gaming, that's why I said it's transformed into something new where, now it's, you know, you're right. The strategy based games are not as popular, I would say, now. Like, I remember, and this is kind of little side, but, like, I used to play, like, Command and Conquer Generals. It's not so much a role playing game in a sense where it's, like, it's not, like, really turn based or anything, but, like, it is about strategy. It is about, you need to make sure that you have a base that's built up, because if you're going to attack another base, you want to make sure that you have forces here, and you want to make sure you have forces there, and, and you have to plan it out just right, because if not, then, basically everyone's going to decimate you, and you're done. You've been defeated.
Yeah.
And that's where, I'd say a lot of times where, you know, you can play games where, you have, your reaction times, and you have all these things, but, like, you know, it just, I would say in today's society, because we're so, like, instant gratification, we're so, like, I need it now. I want to do it now.
Yeah.
You want to basically, you want something fast paced. You want something that's going to be quick. Because if you're like, okay, all right, turn. All right, cool. I guess I'll wait a second until the next person does something. Okay, cool. Now I get to attack you. And you're like, all right, dude, you're going to spend an hour just sitting here waiting for somebody to attack you, or, you know, it's just not as fun as it used to be, and that's really kind of the difference, like you were just saying, from what today's is versus, from yesteryears, and so forth.
Right. So a lot of the characteristics. So there, like I said, there were five that we found in our research. And the very first one is the ability to improve your character over the course of the game by increasing the statistics or levels.
I feel like, and like I said, that's kind of a common theme in a lot of games. I'm talking in, I would say, almost all the games we've ever played, or even separately. That's a very
Right.
common
That's a
thing.
very common. I mean, like killing enemies or what, doing certain things, like
You're leveling up.
you earn that experience, and you use that experience to, gain levels, and you put those points into certain, strengths and
And
or
I was gonna say never weaknesses. You always want strengths,
like,
but
like strength, or, specifically strength, or, intelligence, or what, whatever those like core stats are, or you put them in like, I think like Wildlands or Ghost Recon, like you would put them in, certain abilities or tools that you would use, like a drone
yeah,
or whatever. Like
yep.
you would level up your character, and that's one of the basic elements of an RPG.
Well, like the other one here too. So like the second one, a menu-based combat system with like several choices of skills, spells, and active powers, as well as an active inventory system with wearable equipment such as armors and weapons. So like, and that's another thing where I would say I'm not saying every video game, but I would say a majority of them have a way of customization of yeah, you're going to have certain weapons, you might have certain armor, you might have certain let's say certain equipment or whatever that might be you need to be at a certain level to either wear it or to be able to use it properly, or you might have a certain skill that's based on this. And, there's so many things, but
Right.
like, that's another kind of more common thing, especially with like, we just kind of talked about like Elden Ring or something, or like Skyrim or something like that, where you're building on those things and you have different capabilities, and like I need to be level 70 to wear this armor, but I'm only level 5, and you're like, well, shit, I got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But like, you know what I mean, but like that's kind of like, and that's another really kind of, again, more common thing that I've seen nowadays as well.
Yeah, and some of the more military ones, like I said, Ghost Recon and Wildlands, you might not have like, I mean, you would have skills, but the spells or active powers might not be those, but it might be, like I said, having a drone, or, other types of
Like support, or like a
tech.
sniper support
Yeah,
or something
tech or
like
something
that.
like that. Yeah. The third one in here, some kind of a quest that's central to the story that runs through the game. And then usually there's optional side quests that go in and throughout the game that you can complete. That's usually one of the like the core elements of an RPG.
And like, but and again, like so,
That's
it's a
most games.
very
Yeah.
but it's majority of games where it's like you need to have a main storyline, and then like of course there might be some kind of like, oh hey, talk to Dingleberry over here, and he's going to tell you all about the Dingleberry hoppers and and whatever else nonsense, and then this guy over here is named Johnny, and he's like, oh, I'm going to talk to you about that, and you're like, cool. Now it's
Yeah.
optional. It's never like you need to do it, but it's a nice kind of filler story depending on what the game's about, and how do they tie into the actual main story. Sometimes it does, and sometimes you're like, thank you for wasting my time for the last hour that I could have been doing the main story on.
Or sometimes you find your boss is at level 70 and you're still at 60, and you go, "Why he so high and I'm still at level, 10 levels below?" Well, it's because you didn't do the side quest, you dummy.
And you should have done it from the first place. And then like this next one, so the ability to interact with elements of the environment or storyline through additional abilities like lockpicking, disarming traps, communication skills. So like it's I will say that it's another common thing, but like I do like when games, especially like role playing, depending on what it is like when you're given the option to like you make a decision, like when you're talking to somebody, and then it actually affects the story in some way. So like if you choose one thing or say one thing, and it completely changes the story, each time. So it's like you never know really what to expect. Like that's a very common thing, but it's also a very what it should be, because like in a game that you're constantly ever changing, and there's different ways to do and like how
Right.
to beat the game, you always want to have different options to like, oh, maybe if I kill this guy this time, maybe I won't kill the guy next time, or maybe I'll have her as my wife, and maybe actually, what, next time I'll have her as my wife, or or random, whatever. Like, you pick and choose whatever you feel like in that
This is
moment.
what I liked about, and I'll kind of pick on Mass Effect for a little bit. But this is what I liked about Mass Effect was, I believe it was the second game, in that at the, towards the end of the game, when you're going off to that like last kind of mission to do what you were doing,
Yeah.
you literally had to go through all of the crew that you went through the whole game recruiting to pick which ones were going to do certain tasks. Like this person was going to climb into the vents to do this. These two were going to go with you. These two were going to go, with this crew over here. And if you chose kind of the wrong ones, you would find out like one or more of them actually would die.
So the interesting thing that I will say with, because you and I have talked about with Mass Effect and whatnot, and I didn't know this, but like, I find it very interesting that that game alone is one of the only games, and really the series of games, where you can start out with your character in the very first game and literally go through to the second and then to the third, and literally all the choices you made from one to three have now
Right.
affected how you play the game as a whole, which there is no other game I've ever heard of
Nope.
that has done that in a series. Because like you would think that, I mean, there's some good games that could really benefit from that, but I love how, you know, I, I know Matt picks on me because I know he's like, you need to play it. You need to play it. I'm like, I know I need to play it. I do. I want to play it. I do. But I feel like, I tell you to play certain games. You're like, yeah, whatever. And you're like, yeah, I'll maybe get to it at some point. That's kind of where I'm at with this. I'm like, I will play it. I mean, I told you, man, I was playing Kingdom Hearts, man. And oh shit, man, that still drives me insane, but that's a different story. But I'm just saying, like, there's just certain games like that where you to have an experience like that,
Yeah.
and especially in a role playing game, so I wouldn't say quite exactly like a real traditional role playing game like that, but like, in this case, an action RPG, but affecting the choices, the communication skills, being able to, let's say, lockpick or do other things like that. It's important because let's say, I'm not saying I don't know if it is in this game, but like, if like you say, hey, I want to learn this skill from this person, and then you're like, well, I did that, but now I can't learn that skill or learn a different skill from another person because either they're dead or there's some, you know what I'm saying? Like there's
Yeah. Well,
never
I mean,
ending
for
choices.
Mass Effect, it was more, class specific. So if you were more of an engineer or a technician class, like you would have more, computer skills, more intelligence.
Okay.
So like it wasn't necessarily like you were lock picking in Mass
No.
Effect, but like there were points in the game where, you could disarm locks, digitally. But if your computer skill wasn't
Let's say,
like
yeah.
high enough, you wouldn't be able to do it. So you had to use like, these specific, you know, pick things that were Mass Effect specific.
Right.
And if you didn't have them, you didn't have them. But even with computers, like you could hack in to some of the computers. But if you didn't have that engineer skill and you didn't raise your computer skill, you kind of just had to walk right by them because there's nothing you could do about it.
Yeah. I mean, so, I mean, I guess the question is, though, is there any way to level it up? Or is it harder to level it up?
It'd be harder to level up if you didn't choose the class because the class obviously would be lower.
No, I get that, but I'm just
But
what I mean, I'm assuming there's got to be ways to
oh yeah, I mean
raise it.
you could have devoted points to it. I mean, especially if you've played the game before and like if that's a particular computer that is beneficial to what you're doing,
Yeah.
like you probably would want to devote points to it. But I mean, is it necessary to go through the game? Probably not. But
No, I'm just wondering, you know what I mean? Because like I said, that's all based on your decisions that you make, and that now again with all three games, that still continues, and it's very hard to
yeah, and that I mean, this
think
one
about
was a
that.
big one for that one because you did have to make choices on many different times. Depending on who you wanted to send to do certain tasks, one of them might die, and you had to make that choice of like, I'm gonna send this one,
Well, now three of them are going to be dead.
and that one because you've played it before. Like, I'm gonna choose him, and I'm gonna keep her alive, and then the next time I play, I'm gonna choose her and keep him alive.
Right.
Um,
No, yeah, and I get that.
and
And
then in all the future games, that story is reflected, which is again, it's like the coolest thing in those games. because they reference that same choice that you made.
And that's what I mean. It's just it's crazy that you don't ever see any other games do that. Like to be able to literally whatever decisions you make, whatever you decide to do, it is completely up to you. And then like you go through the story one way, but it can be a totally different experience. Let's say the next
Right.
time, and like that's the kind of game that you want to really have. Like you want to be able to like have all these like different things you can do, but like that's why with when you and I play a lot of our games that we've played, it's like like for example, I know like Far Cry, like I'm just throwing it out there, but like you might have one ending if you kill somebody, and then you might have another ending if you don't kill anybody, and then there's also might be a third ending where in the let's say in the very beginning of the game you could have literally ended the game by just choosing to either walk away or do something else, and it was like cool. Now I know that all three of them are great, but like this one goes on a deeper level, and it's like you could literally change the game by even just making one decision,
Right.
and you would never know. And
I
then
know one of the Far Cry games, I ended it by getting on a boat,
yep, and I know which one you're talking about.
and then I was on a beach, and I was like, "Hey, this is great. I think I won the game."
And that's exactly what it did. And then basically you have to say, "Oh, I got to redo it now,"
I
and
gotta
that's
redo
what
it.
that's what happened. And
I
I
guess
know
I'm not
exactly.
getting on the damn boat.
No, but like that's what I'm saying. It's like and then let's say you play the game a third time, and it's like, oh well, do I want to do that again, or do I want to do
I
something
do
else?
want to sit on a beach. That sounds cool.
It sounds like I just want to sit on the beach and kill the main motherfucker of that game. But anyways, no, I mean, I'd say the last one. So like, the existence of certain character classes, that define the characteristics, skills, abilities, and the spells of a character. So again, so like having a race or a class, or kind of like what Matt was just saying about a mechanic, or you're an engineer, or in this case, if you're, let's say, fantasy, like your warrior, your thief,
Your
your
wizard,
mystic.
warrior,
Yeah.
your sorcerer. Yeah, I mean, Mass Effect has them. Um, Elden Ring. You look at John making a lot of noise over there.
Hey, calm down.
No, you look at Elder Scrolls is famous for these. I mean, they have their classes in Elder Scrolls and similar games like that. But those are kind of like the defining characteristics, and like we said before, I mean, a lot of these games do have these basic elements. I mean, I don't necessarily think, and I'll kind of pick on Far Cry for this. It doesn't have that last one.
No, you're right. I'm not saying that all games will have all of these every single time, but a majority of them have at least, I would say, at least three or more.
Yeah, I mean, they have three or more, and that's kind of where you kind of like that definition of what a video game RPG is kind of watered down. Where it's like, is it not? Is it more just an adventure game? Is it just an action game?
Yeah,
Like,
and that's where it kind of it's a very loose term now, because like when you describe what an RPG is, again back then versus now, where like I said, it's like when I know you keep calling it watering it down, but like having the sub genres, or like the sub categories of like an RPG.
right.
You can't. It almost just seems like you might as well just not call it an RPG anymore. It's like now you have to put a certain term in front of it just to be like, all right, well now, like you said, like a tactical RPG, it's an action RPG, it's a simulated RPG, it's a
Right.
whatever.
I mean, they have like the rogue type RPGs. There's dungeon crawls. I mean, there's all different types of RPGs. But getting back to kind of the history. Yes, the tabletop ones still exist. And you can still play D&D,
I mean,
even though now you can play it strictly on your computer. So
yeah,
technically, D&D, yes, you can play it as a tabletop, but you can play the full game
yeah, on the computer, yes.
on your computer. So technically, eh, it's still tabletop.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, I think if we're talking a more modern based, game, I mean, that's kind of, I mean, that's all they
You
do.
would still need a dungeon master and all that stuff, but
But at least now that you can, but again, like I mean, kind of talked about it already, but like again, the nice part about technology is you have the capability to be able to do these things. So again, so let's say if Matt and I were like, oh man, I don't really want to leave my house. Hey man, you want to play D&D online? Sure, man. Get right on, and you be the dungeon master. I'll play. And I'm like, well, this is boring because it's just the two of us. We might have
Yeah,
to
that
get more
wouldn't work.
people. But I agree though. But like having that capability, especially like with older stuff like that. I mean, I think we already made the joke. I think it was with the last episode. But like, we were talking about the Oregon Trail. Like, I mean, they literally just remade it, and it's like, why would you do that? I mean, I understand it was a game from way back, and it was great and all, kind of, maybe sort of, but I don't know why you'd
We
remake a
played it
game.
in school. It was more of a learning.
I know, but they remade it into
Yeah.
a console game, and I'm like, what? No, I'm like, no, man, like
No.
leave that shit at home, man. Like, don't ever talk about a game. It's like
No,
it's like trying to bring back.
nobody wants to play a game where you just die of dysentery.
Okay, well,
Come
not
on.
even that. It's like who want? Okay, so like think about the worst game of all time. Do you know what that is, Matt? I can tell you exactly the worst selling game of all time.
Why don't you tell me?
E.T.
Well, I could tell you that would be the worst game of all time.
No, I'm just telling you. I know that was a long pause there, but like E.T. was the worst selling game of all time, and they're like, well, it was based off the movie, and then honestly, I looked at the graphics for it. It was, oh my god, and this is why I said back in the day with 8-bit, ugh, it was disgusting, but like it didn't even look like it. But anyways, like to me, certain games like that, you just leave, but we talked about this before with the Disney Fox thing. Like leave it on a shelf. Don't bring it back. It's not worth your time,
Right.
right? Because it's not going to help anybody. It's not going to get you any money back. But looking at how, for example, right? So we were just kind of talking about that 8-bit, right?
Well,
So
I mean, the very first like history of it, went from D&D being that tabletop to, 74, 75. D&D actually had a video game version where, the dungeon master portion of it was a video game. It was granted text based, but you still needed the physical books, the dice, the character sheets to play. But you didn't need a dungeon master because you could use that text to essentially get your information.
yeah, I mean, in a sense, I mean, like, what is it like? Kind of like the early version of like AI.
I don't think it was necessarily AI, but you would get your quests from the game itself, and then it would give you the monster. Then you would have to look it up, and then you would
The only reason why I'm asking is because I mean, was it random? Was it always random, or was it always
No, I'm
kind of
pretty sure they
pre?
probably designed the game with the particular adventures
Okay,
like
so
like programmed out so that
that's the reason why I was asking
yeah.
if that, because if it was random, in a sense, like
They
if
probably just gave you options to choose from.
I understand that early technology in that sense wasn't going to be like what it is now, where you can make it really random, but
It
like,
definitely was probably more hybrid where it created discussion. I mean, obviously, I wasn't alive in '74 to play this, so
I'm sorry, Matt. Were you saying that you weren't old enough at that time?
no.
Okay, no, hopefully kidding, but no, I mean it's interesting that they did that, where they, of course the original was the tabletop and whatnot, but then they brought in that like video game kind of, push to it and saying, hey, we want to make it. And then of course now, like you mentioned before, that now it's literally just all online. And of course it's probably better graphics and, you can play with friends. You can still do, I mean, if you really want the tabletop, go for it. But, it's interesting that now you can just do it all online and you don't have to like, I don't know. I guess you just don't really have to worry about like the old way of doing it. You can just kind of keep it fresh and kind of keep it going. I mean, I know from what I'm told from my dad's way of playing from back in the day, he was like, "Man, we played for like a whole year one time or longer," and I'm like, "You really went to each other's houses on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you spent every Saturday and or whatever day, and you did that for a whole year?" That is dedication, my friend. I don't know if I could do that and actually remember where the hell you were every time. That's impressive. But anyways, I kind of divulged that. But like, I like we kind of mentioned this already, but like the modern kind of like video games of RPGs, right? I mean, we're we're talking more. It's not your like we've already mentioned, like it's not your really typical RPG. It's not a defined version of it. It is a like literally they've created their own subculture of whatever the RPG is, and so like we've talked about Far Cry in a sense,
Right.
or like Borderlands and stuff like that. So of course, like there's certain things that you get like your looter shooters. You're kind of looting around. You're trying to like build your armors up or your equipment, and trying to get the experience and doing all this, and it makes sense in some regards, but like I don't know, like with modern games the way it is now, it just you again, I just don't think that role playing games should even be called it anymore. They should just have their own really loose term, I guess, if you want to call it. Because another big thing is like, actually we didn't really mention this one, but like the or MMOs or like the MMORPGs. So the massive multiplayer online role playing games. So like you're looking at like World of Warcraft
World of Warcraft.
or
I mean, you have
you know
your, the Star Wars had one, the Old Republic,
right.
and of course, Elder Scrolls Online, PlayStation. I'm sure Xbox has their share of,
I can't remember.
the a lot of those free, I think Marvel has or DC has one on PlayStation
Oh
that I
yeah,
played. It's you know
I know what it is. Yeah,
a lot of those like massive multiplayer online games.
yeah. Okay, another one, RuneScape.
Yeah,
Like stuff like that. I mean that's where those kinds of games have I would say especially for PC, like those were the kinds of games that yeah like those were like the earlier versions of like I would say more modern RPGs.
yeah. I mean, it really took the because when you think of RPG, it was really just it was you yourself,
Right.
and you were playing that story with that character, leveling up, and it really didn't incorporate anybody else. You
Yep.
had yourself, and maybe if there's a party that joined your character, you could maybe switch between the two, the party members, but it was a single player game. And the MMORPGs kind of brought you into this like realm of there's literally thousands of players all playing the same game at the same time, and you can go on like World of Warcraft, you can go on adventures, you can go looting, you can
Shit,
go on raids, you can do pretty much anything.
the game's still going, and it's been 20 years or so, roughly. If I'm taking it, I can't remember exactly when it came out, but I know it's been a long time.
Yeah.
And you again, like that was, I would say they're like the pioneers of what especially like nowadays with of how RPGs have now created their kind of like own subcultures because with PC of course and of course the internet and everything else and of course they wanted to make more of an online platform. That was the earliest version of an online platform at the time. And you look at some of the other games now. I mean, like really the consoles like we've talked about before, they didn't really have an online presence until it was like mid 2000s give or take when they started
Yeah.
really kind of doing the online portion. But like PC games in this case, they took that lead on this MMO, and like they're like, hey, we're gonna do it, we're gonna bring people in and like build these massive worlds and like do all kinds of crazy shit. Like I said with World of Warcraft. I mean, I don't even know how many freaking DLCs that thing has. I mean, I've
Oh, it's
looked
got
at
a
it and I'm
ton.
like, holy shit. I mean, imagine trying to buy all these DLCs from even now until way back when. It's like, it's ridiculous the amount of content they have. But like, kind of, going too further in, it's just more like RPGs have really created a really more of a world for themselves in a sense, and they're kind of, and it's nice to see that a lot of modern video games in some ways can be categorized as an RPG in some ways, but like of course it's going to be different because you can't say it's solely an RPG, right? Because I mean we've talked about your action games or your shooter games or stuff like that, and Yeah, they have elements of an RPG, but it's not really a true RPG because of blah 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 and
Right.
so forth.
So yeah, I mean, very early on, and kind of going back to you know history, going back and forth here. Um, I think we seen a lot of differences between Eastern role playing games and Western, where we have the Western, obviously,
Right. You're talking more like the other side of the world of the
right?
Eastern, yeah.
Eastern, which would be more of like
I'm gonna say what, Japan and
Japan, you know,
Japan.
the East, really.
The eastern part of the world. So like basically the Middle East. No, I'm kidding. Like no, I know. Basically the other side of the world that has a different perspective. But I would say yes, majority of like Japan, um, maybe I mean, it's kind of sucks because I'm trying to figure out really where the divide is because I don't like European is not so like where they're still part of the Western side of the world. So I would say Eastern's probably like,
I mean, that's where we get the Final Fantasies. I mean, that's that style of play. Dragon Quest was really one of those Persona, the very early Personas.
oh, yeah.
Um, I mean, there's so. I mean, you start going back, even further. I mean, there's so many that have come out um, between Eastern and Western. I mean, the two styles were completely different when you look at the two of them. The artwork's different, the play style's different. Um, I mean, I can remember, and we talked about it, I think, in not a recent episode, but when I was talking about Vi.
Yeah, which I still don't understand, but that's fine. But I would say, what is that more of an Eastern? Yeah, I would say like an Eastern kind of play style.
It's definitely Eastern in the way because it definitely has that like anime style artwork in it.
Okay.
Um, you can almost tell in the way that the characters talk and the way that they look. Like it's definitely Eastern stylings.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like it's kind of weird too, because like occasionally I'll go on like PlayStation Store, and of course you'll look at like the top 10 most popular games or whatever, and then you start like kind of diving in, and you start to look at the catalog, and then you're starting to look at more. I would say a lot of it's like Japanese kind of games, and you're like looking at it, and you're like, what the hell is this game? And you start to look at it more, and you're like, okay, and everyone's like, yeah, you ever heard of this game? And I'm like, no, because unfortunately, I'm like kind of with the in crowd, and I'm like, I haven't heard of it because no one's talked about it. But you get those random, kind of people that are like, oh yeah, 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 yeah. He's like, you need to go on here and like play this game or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I'm really gonna be into that as much. I mean, again, and I'm not, picking on people or whatever. I mean, if you love that kind of game style and whatever, that's fine. But like, I mean, realistically, I mean, it's like if you want to play, you know, I would say probably what majority of the world plays. And I would say it's going to be more probably Western than Eastern as much. I mean, but I mean, I'm not saying you can't play both because of course there's going to be different game styles and different plays and whatever. But I would say more Western is probably going to be more popular than let's say more of the Eastern, unless you're that kind of like anime, kind of that, um, that game style of kind of like, and I'll say it like I said before, like the Japanese style, like just the
Yeah.
way that they portray their games, and it's very artistic based, and it's different storylines and all this stuff. Where like again, Western's more like, I mean, well, don't get me wrong, there's definitely some good graphics and good storylines and stuff, but I feel like I think for Western, it's kind of more, it's a lot customization, and it's a very like, it's like customization is story driven in a sense. I don't know. I mean, I feel like Eastern's more like it has to be all about graphics, and it's like there's things just flying around you, and you're just like, what's going on? You're like, I don't know, but we're gonna find out in 2 seconds
Right.
once they start talking. But that's just
I,
me.
I was I was looking at Reddit and I literally saw a comment and this guy was saying that he liked how Western RPGs are made by BioWare, and all Japanese RPGs are made by Square Enix, which is
You know,
it's pretty accurate
well, so
actually.
now I'm thinking about it. So I guess technically, because you made a good point there. So like when I play now I'm thinking about it. So I can't say that because if Kingdom Hearts could be considered an Eastern style playing if of RPGs, because I would assume that would be because I didn't know that. Now I'm thinking about it. That was a good point. I'm glad that guy mentioned that because I don't mind Kingdom Hearts. It is weird though that there are times where I mean you can look at the Japanese style of like the subtitles and stuff like that, but
Right.
it's different. But you know, I will say one thing about Eastern style, if that is the case. Why do you fucking make the bosses so fucking hard in those goddamn games? Holy shit. That's all I got to say because I still haven't beat the first one. I mean, it's a great game overall, but I will tell you like it's kind of weird because like if I'm looking at Kingdom Hearts and if I'm looking at let's say Far Cry or something like that. I'm just going to throw Far Cry out there because that's just a game. So like Far Cry, you can do a lot of customization, you can do a lot of different things, you got to use skill points, you got to do all this stuff. And this customization, of course, and whatever you want to do. You basically you choose you do the play style and you do whatever, and it's great, it's fun. When I look at Kingdom Hearts, okay, I know you only played I think the third one, kind of, sort of. The thing is about this game, when I first played, there's not a whole lot of customization. Okay, there's not really a whole lot of that, but there's a lot of um, you'll get equipment, you get like different I think like spells and like you get experience and you get like magic and so on and so forth. But the weird thing is like you get to customize I wouldn't call it a ship. Well, it's not a spaceship. It's like a ship that they fly in for different realms and stuff. But like you get to customize that. But it's like for me, it's extremely hard to like to because you can literally customize it with like different shapes and different little rocket things that you find and and it's weird because like in like if you go from one spot to another, it's like a mini game where you literally will shoot enemies. It almost kind of reminds me of Galaga in a sense where you're just kind of like you're kind of dodging and
Right.
you're kind of doing your thing, and then you finally get to the world and you start playing. But like it because I'm just trying to remember exactly, but like and then you're playing a little bit more, and then you're of course you're versing like different bosses and stuff, and like I said, like for some reason Western, it's like of course you can make the different difficulties, whatever. I'm pretty sure I had mine on easy in Kingdom Hearts. That shit's not fucking easy, man. Because I can tell you right now, I'm still on a boss, and it's. And then the worst part is, this is the only thing that I will say more about this real quick, is that where I'm at after that boss, I think I had to read exactly how many bosses there were because I thought I was like, kind of close to being at the end of the game. No, no, no. It's like you verse the same guy 5 fucking times, but in different ways. It's like he's like, "Oh, you beat him this time. Oh, this time he doesn't have an arm, but you got to beat him again. Oh, well, this time he doesn't have a leg. Well, you got to beat him again. Oh, he came back to life. Well, you got to beat him again. And then this last time, he's finally dead, and now you can move on." And I'm like, why the fuck do I gotta beat this guy 5 different times in the same? You know what I'm saying? Like, why? You know what I mean? Like in a
Yeah.
game, I'm like, if I kill a motherfucker, he better be dead. Okay, like he better be done. He better be gone.
Yeah.
I don't need to like verse him 5 different times or different variations of him. Be dead, man. Like call it a day. End of story. No, but like that's where I'm like I feel like the Eastern style. Like if that's the case, they really try to like well, how can we really piss you off? And how many times can we really like push the edge? Because I'm telling you, like when I played that game, I still haven't played it because I know if I picked up that controller again, I'd probably lose my ever loving mind because I know that I can't beat this guy and I still try to figure it out. But anyways, I know I divulged that, but I just think that it's interesting. Ooh, sorry. I think it's just interesting that when you look at the gaming styles of both RPG styles, it's unique in their own way, and I think it's kind of like if you know if you're let's say if you're drinking whiskey or if you're drinking a cocktail, right? I mean, whiskey's meant for sipping, and if you're drinking a cocktail, well, if it's good, you might drink it like juice and you keep going for it, right? And so, you got to have your different styles, So if you like something nice and slow and you're enjoying your time and you're just kind of hanging out, enjoy that whiskey, man. You like those cocktails and you're ready to pound them? Go for it, my friend,
Go
because
for
you're
it.
gonna go right into it.
So I'm looking at this meme. It does have a lot of words on it, so I don't know if it's really a meme, but it's probably meant for more funny than it is for information.
Oh boy.
But it kind of gives a little bit of like Eastern Western RPG difference.
Oh great. Here we go.
So it's Eastern RPGs question the protagonist's concept of free will while giving the player none.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, sounds
Yep,
about
that
right.
sounds about right of
About
what
right.
I was playing. Yep.
And they show a PlayStation 2 game, Star Ocean and Final Fantasy. Western RPGs question what choices the protagonist will make when the player is given free will, culminating in who the player chooses to have sex with.
That reminds me of so the only game that reminds me of is like
Mass Effect.
well no, I mean sure you could go with Mass Effect all you want. I was thinking actually was more of an Xbox game, which I will say was one of my favorite Xbox games. Yes, Jordan, if you're listening, my friend, this is one of my favorites from them. Is Fable. Fable was a good,
Yes.
kind of because it's that same kind of decision making that you have to make, and of course it's fantasy and whatnot. That was a really great game, and I believe they're trying to remake it. But anyways, um, like that is a game where just like Mass Effect, like you make decisions. Guess what? You have consequences. I think that's the thing. It's like you make decisions and then you realize that you have consequences that now you have to deal with. So like in Fable, I remember playing and you had a wife and you're like, let's see, do I continue to live with her or do I kill her and then do I marry somebody else? And you kept doing that. So it's like this constant need of like, or like really The Sims, right? So it's like you make a family, like, oh, you know what? Let's kill them all, and then you redo the whole thing again, and you kept doing it, and it's like, like it's cool that you could do that, but
Yeah.
now you're like, okay, well, how is this going to continue on?
Yeah, I mean, some of the newer. I mean, obviously, it's not just BioWare or Square Enix. Like Capcom made a lot of games.
Well, that's not East. Is it what Eastern style?
I don't know if it's really. I mean, Capcom made a lot of games. I don't know if it's really Eastern or Western,
I
but
mean,
I mean, Bethesda made.
well, then
I think they're the ones that made the Elder Scrolls, right? I mean, they're
well, yeah,
Elder Scrolls.
yeah, but I'm also thinking, okay, so I know when you said Capcom, I'm thinking like Street Fighter. I'm also thinking if I went to like Bandai Namco, like I'm thinking more like Tekken. Like so Tekken, I mean, but it's not really an RPG. I'm thinking more maybe it's an action RPG, sure. But like I'm thinking more fighting games are I would say a lot of now fighting games are really more Eastern style. Not so much Western in a sense, because a lot of like your Tekken, I wouldn't say Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat I would say is your more Western
Well,
kind of style.
Mortal Kombat wouldn't be an RPG anyway. That's a fighting game.
No, right. I'm just saying no. Like if I'm just basing it, if we're just talking about the Western versus the Eastern, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Mortal Kombat's more your Western. Tekken, maybe Street Fighter in a sense.
Well,
Those
Street
are
Fighter is definitely Western. Like that's
well. I will then fine. I will say Tekken is your Eastern
yeah.
because like that's very Eastern based because
Right.
I know that for a fact. But yes, but that's what I'm saying. Like I'm not saying as the RPG wise. That's all I was saying. I was just more the game styles. That's all.
And another comment on I'm in this one like gaming thing in here. So
Clearly, because I don't know what you're looking at.
this one guy saying Japanese RPGs, fantasy novels, Western RPGs, choose your own adventure.
I mean, it's true.
Which is I mean, with Mass Effect, like games like that, like you literally could do it in any order. And games like, I think back to like Final Fantasy and some of those, like you really couldn't skip around because it was
You just kept following the story.
you just kept following that story.
Well, I mean, so like, because I already know you're gonna. surprised you haven't mentioned it already, but Borderlands, right? Because like that, I mean, of course, definitely more Western because you're choosing and you get to choose your quest and stuff, and you're not having to go to,
You remember
side
playing
quests.
a game, Bully?
Yeah, that was actually one of their early games, which from Rockstar Games. But
Yeah.
yes, I actually never, I never actually played it. I know I've seen like videos of it, and I've seen what like you do. I mean, yeah, you're literally it's like a 12-year-old or whatever. He's running around beating the shit out of people, in a sense. And I mean, it basically was a school, and like you do certain things and like certain tasks and whatever. But like,
Yeah. It was a fun game. I mean, it obviously is probably not a RPG, but I mean, it was a fun game. I just kind of thought of that, but
well,
I
yeah,
mean, I would think maybe like some of the Witcher games
oh yeah,
would
definitely. Witcher games, I would say. I mean, you could go. I don't know. I don't know. Would I mean like Cyberpunk? Like if we're talking like modern, I mean, is it? You know what I'm talking about? In a sense, I mean, is that more of a RPG? Like I would say like maybe an action RPG or
definitely action RPG. I don't know if it fits the because again, that's one of those. Cyberpunk is one of those. I think you're not choosing a class of person necessarily.
no, but I mean, you're still doing your skill levels. You might have certain abilities or something like that. And still being able to customize equipment and in those regards. I mean, so you're still doing all those basic needs and of what an RPG is, but it's not the traditional like, oh, okay, it's going to be strategy. I mean, every game I feel like in this whole slew of things, you do have to have some sort of strategy. Even when you're defeating bosses and stuff, like I know when you were just talking about Elden Ring, and even though with that quick reaction, that's all strategy, my friend. Like you need to know exactly what you're going to do in that moment and how
Right,
you're
and
going to
that's
do it.
I mean, that's the whole point of Elden Ring is you need to. I mean, it when they talk about like Call of Duty, and it's kind of one of those funny things like you see in videos where like you just need to get good. Like
Like how the hell do you get good?
with Elden Ring, you literally need to get good, or you're gonna die about a million times. Which I actually have died a million times in that game.
Well, let's see. Have you counted how many times you died in that game?
I don't think I could count that high, John.
Wait, are you only saying you can count to 10, Matt? What's going
Oh,
on
I've
here?
died more than 10 times.
Oh, okay. Well, I just didn't know if you can count more than 10. That's all I
No,
was asking.
I've definitely died a whole hell of a lot in that game. And that's like I said, it's one of those games where you have to get good at it. And you know, it, that one I definitely would classify as an RPG because it does have all five of those, you know, elements in the game. I mean, you choose your class, you have spells and you can do magic, you can attack. Is it more action based? Yeah, it's not turn based. So again, you use that loose term. Is it an RPG or is it more adventure?
I think what we should really classify it as is like, is it an OG RPG or is it a what we call a modern RPG? You know, because like really the whole turn based in a strategy game kind of a deal, that's
Right.
gone. Like that, there's not very many games left, even in now, like with catalogs and stuff, that are even a more very popular game that do that still. Like that was a very like 70s to about 90s. Like that's really when they were doing that. Other than after that, it was like you look at 2000s and above. Like you don't see many games that had turn based and this and that. Like they basically just stopped doing that. So that's why I kept saying I feel like we should just like coin it and just be like, are we talking about an OG or are we talking about a modern?
Right.
Because that's where I'm like, you need to like when this whole turn based shit, it's like you might as well just drop it because we don't have a turn based anything anymore. Because no many people are gonna be like, oh hey man, so okay, I'm gonna attack you. I'm gonna wait a second. Okay, you're gonna attack. Okay, cool. Now I'm gonna attack you again. No, shit, man, I'm like, give me the gun. Like, this
Well,
thing.
and I think that that's where we get those like subgenres where we're saying like it's an action role playing game where the combat's not like a tactical where you're saying like oh, it's not my player's turn yet to hit. I got to wait for my three other party members
Yeah, to attack.
to attack, and then the enemy, the enemy has five. There are five enemies that I'll have to attack, and then I can
I mean,
do
okay,
my
so
attack. So the action ones really is like you're controlling that single player like in real time, and
yeah,
the the action you're controlling. Basically, it's like I guess they would call it hack and slash. Like you're doing the
yeah.
actions yourself.
So I mean, now I'm thinking about it. I mean, we didn't even really talked about this either, but like, there actually are a lot of RPGs like on your phone. Like now I'm thinking about it. Like if you looked at like, um,
I
it's
have
like
a
a lot.
couple AFK games
That's
that
what I'm saying. Like something like that, or like the Marvel. Like I know there's like a couple of like games that they have on there too. But like those, I would say those are probably the only RPGs, like true RPGs, if we're talking like turn based and things like that, and like having the skills and all this other stuff. Like that is a true
yeah.
like OG now modern, but it's a lot of it's more on phones. Like you don't see it more, or maybe on a computer or whatever.
You
But
don't
you're
see
not.
it on console.
You're
I mean,
definitely not getting
I have
consoles.
Vi on my phone, by the way. Just
Of
so you
course
know,
you do.
but I mean, I have two of those AFK kind of games. They're AFK Arena and then X Hero. They're both kind of the same game, just different. But
Yeah.
the combat in that is turn based, where each player takes their turns in attacking.
Yeah, and I mean, and so what's funny, I know my dad mentioned this earlier, but so Pokemon technically is a RPG in a sense because you're basically doing all of that. And I know it's funny how the one topic that you don't really want to talk about is actually something that is, because in a sense, you are improving your character. I mean, granted, it's multiple characters because really it's your team of Pokemon. You're choosing. I mean, I wouldn't say skills. I mean, you are kind of you can choose like their different attacks and different things like that and so forth. You can upgrade certain things, like you can update your appearance and stuff. But does it help you with a you know attacking? No, because it's really more for Pokemon. But then like you look at the storyline. Yeah, there's a story. There's a story in the game. There's other quests on the side as well. And the characteristics, skills, abilities. I mean, not probably so much per se. I mean, it's not like I'm like, okay, well, I'm a Harry, you're a wizard. Like I'm not doing
Right.
that. But like, you're kind of, I don't know, you're just kind of defined as like you're a Pokemon trainer. You're gonna go do your thing and so on and so forth. But in a sense, like that's where even that would be probably as close as you're going to get to probably consoles as much. I mean, Pokemon is definitely in one version of that. I mean, like I said, like your phones, like a lot of those games, like now, I would say are definitely a lot more turn based. But we both agree that yeah, most console games aren't your OG traditional turn based. Like I was mentioning about Final Fantasy, like Final Fantasy 2. That was an OG like turn-based game where you're doing exactly what we were just talking about on a console. But I think for the most part, I mean, with modern stuff, I mean, really, I would say, like I just told you, whether you really you just need to define it as, like I said, OG, modern, and differentiate the two and be like, okay, OG turn-based strategy, modern, quick reaction, storytelling and customization and doing that piece of it, because like you need to define
Yeah.
it. You can't just have it one thing and then like assume that's what it is. Because that's where I think we needed to change that loose term now, because there's no reason to keep it around now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have like classic games. Like I think back to maybe not the remakes of Diablo, but the classic computer versions.
Yeah,
Like even though the remakes are pretty similar in the way that they were, you can kind of look at them and call them action RPGs. But I do think at the end of the day, whether you have like, oh, this is an action RPG, why don't you just call it an action game as opposed to calling it like an RPG when we said very early in the episode, like most games nowadays have at least 3 or 4 of those elements in it. So most games that are coming out now, you can level up a character. They do have stories. Most of your choices in the game do affect like the story or at least like what you're doing. Like you can
Right.
lockpick, you can
Right.
interact with things. Most games now, guess what? Like there is loot. Like you have to, find stuff within the environment
Right, to build things or,
to find gear, to find, to
what?
find. So, I mean, a lot of these games are all, I mean, you could technically classify them as some kind of an RPG if you make enough subclasses for it.
No, I know, but it's
But I
funny.
mean, it just call it an action game, call it an adventure game, call it a strategy game, call it whatever it is. But
I mean, if you look at it, I mean, I would say majority of really, I would say more probably of the popular games, it's really they might as well just call it an action adventure RPG because that's really what I would say majority would be. Was an action adventure because your open worlds, it's an adventure, right? You're exploring whatever's around you and being able to do all that. Now I understand like your MMOs, like yeah, usually those are your more you might have the base game and then you're like, okay, I have the online version now. So like I mean, I'm not able to say it. Ready? Ready? Even GTA Online, that would be an MMO,
it
and
would be.
and it sucks, but like even Red Dead Redemption 2, like that's an MMO, and like yeah, trust me, I know Matt and I used to hate when those motherfuckers would come around and they'd shoot us and they'd steal our loot and stuff, but like it's true. I mean, but like those kinds of games that really it's like I said, your MMOs and your action adventure.
I think if we just took it as this, John. Okay, you're playing a video game. You sit down, you put the game in, you pick you're playing a character, whether you've picked a character or the character is just who you have. At the end of the day, what is a role playing game? You're playing a game you're playing a role in that game, right? Like
I mean, you're not wrong.
most games, you're going to be playing that role. So if you took all 5 elements out of that equation,
Yep.
you're still playing a role of a character in that game. So I mean, I think most of the geeks out there, like the super nerds and the geeks, well, that's not a role playing game. Like shut up,
He's like, just shut up.
just shut up.
Listen.
If you classify playing a character in a game as playing a role, then you're playing a role playing game. Like
No, I mean,
whether it's
you're right.
action, whether it's tactical, whether it, unless you're playing Tetris or Candy Crush, where you're not playing a character, then shut up.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I do.
You're playing a character in a role in a game, so that
Yeah. No, Matt, I totally agree with you. I'm just saying it's just funny how when I was gonna be like, well, yeah, what about Dr. Mario or what about Pac-Man? It's like, no, I mean,
you're still playing a character in a game.
No, I
so
know. I
you're
know.
still playing a role playing game.
No, I know. But that's why I said I would say majority. It seems like again, when you would just call it a role playing game, it's like you might as well just call it all video games of all time. You're basically in a role in a game. Look, most games are literally RPGs.
You're
in
playing a
sense.
role in a game.
Correct. It's like you couldn't. How could you play a video game? Because you need to have a role and you need to play inside the game somehow, right? So there's got to be
Unless somehow you're playing this game and you've completely disassociated yourself from like yourself from playing this game, then you're not actually playing the game. You're just a mere observer, just going, like no, you're taking that character on whatever journey that game is, right?
Yeah.
So you're technically playing that character, whatever that character is going through in that journey.
Like I told you, I mean, that's literally all games. That is basically, you might as well just call it the master video game, role playing games, which is literally every game in existence. Because you are somehow controlling somebody
Right.
to do something inside of a game.
So you can, I mean, you can consider first person shooters, you can consider them RPGs in a way.
No, I mean, you're like you just mentioned, you're a character in a game, and you're playing a role,
Right.
and that's it. I mean, literally, then that's it. You know what? That's what we should have done in the beginning. We should have just wrapped it up. Look, role playing games, literally every video game in existence. Boom, drop the mic.
Well, don't drop the mic because they're pretty
I
expensive.
don't know. No, they are pretty expensive. No, I mean, so guys, I mean, like when you look at role playing games, I mean, like what Matt and I just literally talked about for a second, like it's literally every game. I know we talked about like the action and adventure. We talked about the MMOs. We talked about like the Eastern versus the Western styles and so forth. Again, literally, it seems like the constant trend here is
We have to overcomplicate it.
yes, we have to overcomplicate literally a genre of gaming, which is literally not even complicated. It is basically you've made it, and I've only made it even more complicated by saying it was OG versus modern. But I look at it now like, yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, literally every game you ever play, literally in existence, literally on your phone, literally on anything
Yeah.
that you can play on, is a RPG in some way, shape, or form.
Because you have to step outside of yourself to be that character.
Right. Literally. So like when when Matt and I talk about like playing the game, like you just said, stepping outside of yourself and immersing yourself in this world as this character. Literally every video game in existence, like couldn't make anything up. Literally, I don't even know. I couldn't think of any game that you couldn't be somebody or a thing or whatever it is, like whatever the main protagonist is. You're gonna do it, and you're gonna follow a story, and you're gonna probably have like we said, at least 3 of those elements, if not more, depending on what it is. So, guys, you've been great. We've been doing this for a bit now. I know both him and I we're ready to set sail into snooze land because I'm telling you, we're tired, my friends. But anyways, we hope you enjoy your day, your night, whatever the case is. We love the support, and as always,
Stay geeky.